Good afternoon. I'm Elizabeth Alexander, president of the Mellon Foundation, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you to our event, Reading, Power, and Freedom. I'd like to begin by inviting all of you to say hello in the chat, which you are already doing. The chat is rolling and scrolling, and there are people who are listening in from all over the country, from small towns, from large cities, from everything in between. So it's wonderful to have this community gathered virtually today. We want to know who you are, where you're watching from, and if you have any questions for our speakers this afternoon. And we'd love to see lots of audience engagement in the chat throughout the program and the greater exchange and conversation that the chat supports. Today, we are convening a conversation on the rapid rise of book bans, educational censorship, and other growing restrictions on reading and learning taking place in libraries and lecture halls, classrooms and campuses, and communities throughout the United States. Books are currently being banned at the highest rate in our country since the American Library Association first began documenting these numbers. At the same time, due to recent bills and legislative efforts, half of the states in the country currently censor the teaching of race and gender in public colleges and K-12 schools. In particular, any teaching that examines them in the context of our collective history. This criminalization of reading and learning impoverishes us all. It undermines our ability to understand and to navigate our powerfully multivocal American society. It privileges myth and stereotype over fact and shared experience. And it bars us from reading about, learning about, and seeing clearly the full arc of the beautifully complex American story and all the people in it. So joining us today for a discussion on the significance of unencumbered reading and learning are three extraordinary guest speakers: Emily Drabinski, Lisa Lucas, and Tressie McMillan Cottom. Emily, hi there, everybody. It's nice to see you.
Hi,
Emily,
so wonderful to be
Drabinski,
here.
Hi. It's wonderful. I've been looking forward to this for some time. I only wish we were together. Emily Drabinski is president of the American Library Association and an associate professor at Queens College Graduate School of Library and Information Studies. She edits the book series Gender and Sexuality in Information Studies and is also a contributing writer for the news organization Truth Out. In 2020, she was a recipient of the Career Achievement Award from the Association of College and Research Libraries Women and Gender Studies section. Emily Drabinski. Lisa Lucas is Senior Vice President and Publisher for Pantheon and Schocken Books at Penguin Random House. She is a prior publisher of the magazine Guernica and a former Director of Education at the Tribeca Film Institute. Most recently, she was the youngest, first woman, and first person of color to serve as executive director of the National Book Foundation. Lisa Lucas. And Dr. Tressie McMillan Cottom is a columnist for the New York Times, a professor and researcher with the Center for Information Technology and Public Information, Technology, Oxford, or not, and public life at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and a 2020 MacArthur Fellow. Her most recent book, which won the Brooklyn Public Library's 2019 Literary Prize, is the truly extraordinary Thick and Other Essays. Thank you for that book. Emily, Lisa, and Tressie, we welcome you. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having us.
So let's start by setting the scene. We're going to ask a big question first that gets to the heart of banning books, banning knowledge, banning people, and the move to restrict access to the stories and perspectives of a multivocal society. Could each of you answer? We'll start with you, Emily. Talk to us about the relationship between reading and power.
Thanks for starting us off with a softball. Absolutely. And I just want to say thank you so much for the invitation to join you all today and to be speaking with these two luminaries. Is just the honor of I don't know, a career, I would say. So I'm really, really pleased to be here. And so hello to everyone who's joining us today. I don't think we can talk about reading and power without talking about libraries. So I want to start there. America's libraries are among our most used, most trusted, and best loved public services and public institutions. We serve everyone. Our collections reflect the diversity of thought and values that exist in every community. I think there's a lot of power in that, in the capacity of libraries to connect people to worlds beyond their own experience, as well as to their own, which they may not yet have a way of describing to themselves. I think that piece is so crucial, and why we've seen a lot of these book ban attempts aimed at children and young adults. Reading is a way of becoming legible to both ourselves and to each other. But it's not just about the relationship between the reader and the book. Reading is also a social act. It's one of the ways we see ourselves in the world and imagine ourselves as a part of various communities. Reading has the power to constitute community, and I think that's really important. The act of censorship acknowledges this power. Who gets to read what is ultimately a question about who is allowed to see themselves as belonging to which kinds of communities. And by exercising the power to ban certain kinds of books, people and institutions declare that certain kinds of readers are not welcome in that community. Libraries democratize access to knowledge, and I think, and when I think of my own relationship to fiction, the extent to which I can imagine a different world is linked to the extent that I have access to imagination, my imagination, and the imagination of others. So I'll close by talking about a book that I talked about on a podcast with Tressie a couple of weeks ago, and Bolo Mbue's wonderful novel, How Beautiful We Were, which sticks with me. And I'm so pleased to have so many members of my family reading it after they heard me on your podcast, Tressie, so thank you for that. And in that book, she writes about an all too real fictional community where the land has been leased to an oil company by a government that has made that deal with the corporation. The attendant pollution causes death and disability on a broad scale. But what can anyone do about it? And to me, I wake up every morning, I'm like, what are we going to do about it? Like, we look at the world, what are we going to do about it? And in a masterful first chapter, Mbue gives us a way of imagining a way out. A man swallows a key, nobody can leave. Change can happen, and sometimes it requires madness, belief, and hope. That, for me, is the power of reading. It gives us an opportunity to imagine both why and how the world could be otherwise.
Thank you. Thank you. And let me follow up on something. What do you mean when you say reading can constitute community?
When I read and you read the same book, right? And I see, Tressie, you've read this book, right? You and I have read this book. We could talk about this book. I am guessing we could talk about this book for hours. And by having that kind of reading that we can do in community with one another, both of us are in a world together, a world that we can change. And I think that's essential. All of us have to believe that things can be different.
And can I say about Emily, who I just love to hear her talk about books, which is why I had her on the podcast. I just really wanted us to talk about books. But I also think about the community it builds across time. Liz, I just wanted to say that. So I also think about the way you can pick up a book today and, books don't expire. Whenever people, sometimes they'll come to me and be like, oh, I'm sorry. I know I'm reading your book late. I'm like, books don't expire, right? Like the reading material doesn't expire. You can pick it up and you're also in conversation with people who read it 20 years ago, 50 years ago, 100 years ago. And so it's also building community that I think is resistant to the clock. And what do we have anymore that is resistant to the clock, that all-consuming tick-tock? So you can also build community like outside of time and space. It is quite literally magical. I know I get real romantic about it, but I was just thinking that.
Well, thank you. And I love that because I think that there is timelessness and across time, as you say. And also we might put a pin in the idea of being in community in spaces together, in classrooms, in libraries as community spaces, and in other kinds of community spaces that we might name. And so, Tressie, how would you answer the question? What is the relationship of reading to power or empowerment?
Empowerment. Gosh, it's going to be really hard to answer it better than I think Emily did. And I also want to thank you so much for giving me a chance to talk to two people who I just so respect, admire, and enjoy, and the chance to be here with you. So thank you so much. And to everyone joining us for what I think is just really an important conversation. And a conversation, by the way, I wish we didn't have to have. So let's just say that. And I want to thank you for doing something that I think is important, which is expanding this conversation to include not just book bans, but the many bills marching across this country that is also restricting, like you said, curriculum broadly defined within classrooms, across the classroom, K through 16. So, it's when I think about reading and power, the very first thing that just sort of happens to me emotionally is I think about, enslaved people, and I think about one of the first acts of agency so many enslaved people took was learning how to read. And I think it speaks to, and not just enslaved people here in the United States of America, but you see this with oppressed and enslaved people anywhere in the world, right? If you think of enslavement, yes, it's an act of possession and dispossession, but it is also fundamentally an act of control, trying to control the body and through control of the body, trying to control the creative energy and spirit and potential of a human being. And so when people want to try to own themselves and reassert their agency, one of the ways they do that is by trying to claim the right and freedom to read. And you see that over and over and over again. And I think it speaks to how fundamental human beings think the act of reading is to the expression of human agency, which is why it's so fundamental to how societies organize themselves. And so when I think about how important reading is to the relationship of power, we need only look at how much people are willing to fight over it to understand its power. I don't think you have to value reading yourself, right? I can get personally romantic about reading, but I fully understand that not everyone enjoys reading or can have different, maybe contentious relationships with reading. But I say to people, you don't have to enjoy it to understand socially, politically, and culturally that a lot of people are willing to invest a lot of energy and resources into turning reading or access into reading, the spaces where we read, who is allowed to read, what will constitute effective, accessible, affordable reading, that people are willing to invest a lot in controlling access to that, to understand that there is something at stake there for you individually and collectively, whether you enjoy reading or not. The fact that a governor is willing to invest political capital in making that a political football says that you need to have an opinion on whether or not you believe reading is a fundamental right or not. Right. And so the relationship to me is one that is, yes, individual, but I think we need to be making the case more strongly that you need to have a perspective on this, whether you enjoy reading or not. This is, to me, definitionally a social problem, one where if you're going to consider yourself an informed citizen, if you're going to consider yourself a member of a family, a responsible parent, a responsible member of a community, if you are responsible for anyone, and you consider yourself a member of a bowling league, a member of a church, you right now need to have a perspective on whether or not reading is something that you value. If not for yourself, then for others, because someone somewhere values it enough to fight for it. And so I think the relationship is individual, is social, it is political in both the small sense and in the capital P sense, political. And it's cyclical. We find ourselves in these positions, and we're at the top high point of that cycle right now.
Thank you. And I want to come back to the now part of it. But first, I'd like to hear from Lisa how you would answer this question, the relationship between reading and power.
Sure. I mean, to that idea of the sort of personal politics and the larger politics that Tressie was talking about. And also, hi, I'm so happy to be here with all of you all and so happy to be with you, Elizabeth, and everyone watching. It's so important. It really is so important to talk about this right now. But the idea of sort of personal power, political or personal politics, and sort of larger collective politics, right? Of course, we know when we are denied access to being able to understand the information that's in front of us, or being able to decode the news, or being media literate, or being able to sort of unpack our lives in context of history, right? That is power. Knowledge is power, not to be corny about it, but these things are true. But on the larger sense, I think the real sense over the years from an America that's not interested in a multivocal America, that's been able to create this sort of false sense of non-diversity for many, many years. And that's by keeping, a lockhold as gatekeepers on our arts and who's making the books, who's writing the books, who's getting their books promoted. Access to that information, marketing the books. And I'm talking from a publisher standpoint, of course, because that's where I live. And you have, all of these different ways that we were able to reduce the impact of other voices for so very long. Of course, there were touchstone books in the 50s and the 60s and before that. But really, the volume was quite low in comparison to the enormous amount of books that were published into the quote unquote mainstream. And once that power starts to change, just like when hip hop starts to become beloved by, young, white, middle American kids, you start seeing the bans. These lyrics are terrible. We shouldn't be talking about this. And you see that from all different types of community, but it started to spread. And what we have now is an environment where these ideas have started to spread so much and so fast. Social media is making books nuclear. We are all hearing about this award or this podcast, and we're running to buy that book, and we're seeing volume around anti-racism. We're seeing volume around, trans rights issues. We're seeing volume around stuff that you could really only consider niche and marginal in the mainstream book constellation 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. And so it's changed so much. And I think that you see the power of actually having primacy inside of books, inside of literature, inside of who tells stories, inside of who is the expert. And now you see a real closing down of ranks. Everyone knows that minority majority is coming, quote unquote, such a terrible expression. But the dynamics and the demographics of this nation are changing so quickly that what you're seeing is a scramble to maintain power as a diminishing demographic. Right? How do we take what we decided was mainstream and what we decided was going to be the way that this country was perceived and how we are going to train our young people to perceive of themselves as Americans, whoever they are. And that degrades, right? When you have a tipping point in the population. And so I think that you see, just like when you have slavery and you're taking away the ability to read, just like in Russia, Masha Gessen wrote this incredible book called The Future is History, which is talking about totalitarianism in Russia and how the first thing you lose are the books and the access to interiority, the access to sort of thinking about ourself and our place in the world and our personal power and the import of our lives and being able to access other nations, other places, other communities, other religions. And so this is a time-tested power move. Not just when people were being enslaved, not just in Russia when the ranks are closing down, but anytime you want to keep anyone down or you want to maintain disproportionate power that you really don't deserve and you really can't hold on to through any other traditional means, you have to really look at the fact that knowledge is power and you have to keep everybody ignorant and you have to keep everyone dumb and you have to make sure that everybody's on the same thing because the power of an educated community and people who are able to sort of be legible to each other, people that are able to sort of imagine more or elsewhere or the connections between us are dangerous. And I think that just the volume of the lashback against just having an equitable literary landscape goes to show you just how much. But I do think also power is in numbers. And a lot of these books that we're seeing banned and a lot of these ideas that we're seeing come through, which is why I think they're moving to ideas and curricular topics rather than a particular title, is because we are not a nation of readers, actually. We are unfortunately not a robust nation of readers. We can sell a book and we're really excited if it sells 50,000 copies to 325 million Americans. If it sells 100,000, that's terrific. If it sells 1 million copies to 1/325th of the American populace, you have one of the best books year over year for 10 years, right? Very few books achieve this in 1 year's time. And so they're looking for heat, right? The books that are really capturing the imagination, which is an opportunity, right? Because we have the power to actually read all the other books that nobody has looked at and to elevate just the practice of reading. And I think that there's nothing but power inside those pages. Nothing. Everything about my life has been empowered by books. Every relationship I have has been empowered by books. My politics, my faith, and, the things I believe in, that's all from books. And so, it's hugely powerful and it's the obvious, but I do think it bears reminding because we forget, we take it for granted. The book is always there, but the book is not mighty without a reader. And we're in a place where I think we have to talk about who's policing the books, but we also have to talk about who's reading them in the first place.
Thank you. Thank you. And so I think what I'm hearing many things in there, but I think what you're lifting up is that the books and the book banning, that's a proxy for other things.
Yes.
The books are a proxy for a changing demographic and an empowered demographic, right?
Absolutely. I think seeing us become empowered means let's strip the tool with which you build the power away as soon as possible, and any allies you might develop along the way.
Think about it as sort of,
please.
Sorry, just as like a queer person growing up in this country and growing up in Boise, Idaho, where I think I knew 2 lesbians who happened to have an antique store in my mom's. Anyway, it's like very few representations or and not even like film or media representations, but people in real life who had an open queer identity, and how different that is today. I have a 15-year-old who has out trans kids in his class, and it's the thing that's not even imaginable to me as somebody just a couple, just like not that much older than him. And so the profusion of ways of being in the world and occupying yourself and your gender and your sexuality, it's so beautiful and wonderful and inspiring this kind of intense political crackdown on those ways of being. So it's like it's a proxy for something, right? Because we know it can't be about the book. Anybody who has a kid knows that the book is not their sole interaction with the outside world. That's not their primary mode of exploring who they are, right? So it's like the book is a thing that you could potentially control. You imagine that this is an object we could remove from circulation, and maybe it would remove this problem of so many ways of being. And that's the part that I really get stuck on. Like I like difference. I enjoy being around it, and it doesn't scare me. But I think there are more openings, right? Because exactly what you were saying, Lisa. It's not as if book bans are new today. We've got hundreds of years of like really solid book bans on any book that didn't cut, right? It's like the book. There are many ways to ban a book, and that legacy.
We've always been banned, right? Exactly. Yeah. But I also think that there's books are unique in the landscape, right? If you are a dance maker, right? You're a dancer. Every school, everywhere, every age group doesn't have dance. Not everyone. Many people do, but not everyone. You make theater, you're a theater maker. Everyone doesn't have a black box theater in their school. Everybody doesn't have a theater class. If you play lacrosse, every school doesn't have a team, right? One of the only ways you can reach every child in America, is through a book. And it's such an interesting sort of starting place, right? Because almost if any business that could give any American kid from the day they were 2 years old a thing, so that they could hope that they would buy that thing, they would be so excited. That's the opportunity of a lifetime. That's market share right there immediately, day one, with all the opportunities to grow them forever. And books have that. And so it is really one of the most powerful places to start because you're feeding into every child that is inside of a school. And it's the only way to get to everybody. How else can you reach everyone? Not everybody has a TV. Not everybody has a phone. Everybody has broadband. Not everybody has anything, but everybody's in school. Most people are in school.
But there's also this attack on public schools that all of it is tied together.
But it's very much like the place. It's the place of all access. And libraries, right? You also have something that's free to everyone. So the spread is bananas.
Let's talk about the spaces in which each of you works. Lisa, in now commercial publishing, though you know about all of the different ways that books are made. Tressie, university, and also in the public square of mass media. And Emily, in the classroom as well, and also in libraries themselves. And also, I would say, within the larger space of libraries and librarians, right? So that larger identity. Give us report from the front lines of where you are and how these combined issues that we're discussing of book banning and also the banning of not only information but certain modes and fields of study is affecting the place where you work. Why don't we start with Tressie?
Yeah, I just keep thinking about, I was just listening to Lisa and Emily, and I was thinking about there is something, today's book bans and information censorship, I would say more broadly, curriculum censorship and the attempt to control the flows of information are both historically, part of a historical trajectory. And as things do, as when they are, have a specific character to this moment. And the thing about this moment that is specific, one, I think this is maybe the first time that the appeal to censorship, those trying to censor are not saying that they are more expert than those who are making the books and sending out the information. Previous book ban eras, it was a cleric who said, we know better because we are closer to God or to the seat of religion. Or you have, in the 1960s, we know better because we went to more elite schools, or we have the more liberal arts, the greater liberal arts tradition, right? What we have now is not an appeal to liberalism, but an appeal to illiberalism. There's nobody saying that we've read these books more closely than those who recommend them and those who are putting them into schools. And in fact, there's a great pride in saying, no, I haven't read them at all, or I don't need to read them, right? It is an appeal to sort of a popular ignorance, and that does feel distinct and new about this moment. And I mentioned that for a reason. I'm gonna stick a pin in for a second and tell you I mentioned that for a reason, because I think that is part of the way this broader based attack on my workplace and the places where I work, how we do knowledge production, and why it feels so particularly chilling. And then the second thing that feels distinct about this moment is that this sort of like information censorship is sort of stemming not from a scarcity of information. So previous eras, it was that, it was hard to get your hands on a book, right? I mean, books came to you through schools, through libraries, and from a traveling salesperson, right? Somebody came around selling encyclopedias. My mom bought me some. It was a really big investment to have a set of encyclopedias. That and the anthology of Negro literature, which my mom also had, and we were very proud of. Right, yeah. But it was very hard to have sort of like a survey, a census of information at your fingertips. The information deluge that the internet has brought us has actually changed our relationship. So we have both this pride and sort of ignorance, and that being the appeal to censorship, and there is just so much of it. And so the book is actually competing in this weird way with information overload. And what that means for where I work and the ways that I work is that the attacks on us are that we can be displaced by these other modes of knowledge production. So the censorship is saying not that there are greater experts than university professors or knowledge producers at like the New York Times or whatever, or public intellectuals. It is an appeal to sort of a delegitimization of expertise altogether. They don't want to put in other experts. They're saying it is an attack on the idea of expertise altogether, right? And part of the way they are making that claim is by saying you don't need expertise because there's now so much information, right? You can ban the books because you've got the internet, and you don't need to worry about it. And I think that has a certain type of palliative effect on the general public who maybe isn't paying a ton of attention, and it's easier to sell them on the bans and the pernicious effect of information censorship and banning curriculum at colleges and universities, because it's so easy to sneak in a censorship ban by saying, well, yeah, we'll get rid of the African American Studies department, but don't worry, because your kid can still Google all of it, right? And don't worry about the fact that your kid won't be able to find any books in their school library with characters that look like them. Because, hey, the internet is, social media is full of pictures of people who look like them, right? There are memes of queer people all over the place. So what's the big deal, right? When instead, getting rid of the entire idea of putting information in context, of the importance of understanding that history is not a series of facts, but of meaning making and sense making and building relationships around data, that information is more than data points, that information is integrating numbers and a series of information into your pre-existing schema and then being able to act on it. And one of the things that we are seeing in the classroom that is terrifying to many of us is that young people, even some of our own colleagues, are not clear on the difference between information and data and learning. And if we aren't clear on the difference, I'm not sure that we are prepared to be advocates in this really complex debate in the public, where we need really clear, strong advocates explaining to people that no, you do not want to let loose your children on Google. That no, history is not just a series of facts, that no, you do not want your children trying to make ethical considerations about what their identity means, about what their values are, from a series of decontextualized, uncategorized series of data points that have not been given any schema of meaning or classification through trusted institutions and people like librarians and editors who have vetted it for much less line editing, but clarity and sense making, right? That communities of people who care about the veracity of information have come to a census about this is what value, this is what this community and this nation or this group of people considers important and worth knowing. And if we aren't prepared to make that case, that I think we are worried that we are in trouble. And to be fair, we're tired. We're tired, and we've been through a lot. And there's a reason why we perhaps aren't prepared for the conversation. But I think that we are afraid. We are under-resourced, overwhelmed by the really rapid onslaught of bills, the turning of public sentiment. It is a terrifying thing to be thought of as the enemy of your elected officials, to be a public enemy, for people to turn against you when you have considered yourself a public servant. It's scary and alienating. I think a lot of us also feel that way.
Yeah, thank you. Emily, front lines of libraries.
I mean, it's just what people are facing on the ground in American libraries right now. It just makes my hair curl sometimes. And, it doesn't start with just the book banning thing, right? Like, we've been talking a lot about kids in schools, right? Like the argument that when a child is in school, they can gain access to all this information. But in many parts of the country, having a school librarian, a certified school librarian, and a well-resourced school library inside of your building is an extraordinary luxury afforded only a very, very small number of people. I was in Chicago visiting friends a couple of weeks ago and learned that they've got 500 public schools in that system and about 90 librarians. And so you're doing a lot with very little, and people are doing that every day in contexts that just, it's not fair. right? You look at public libraries where not only am I trying to help people find the book that they want to, keep them reading, which is a great service, but also we're the only public institution where people can sit down, get a drink of water, use the bathroom, plug in a laptop, use broadband internet. The library becomes the emergency management system for everybody, right? Like it is the site of so much. And also in Chicago, just recently, there's been a rash of violent threats, bomb threats called into libraries across that metropolitan region. And you're just trying to do the good work of making public resources available to the public. That's your job. Who could be against it? I hear so many beautiful, amazing, wonderful library stories every day. I'll tell you just one. I was in a library in West Warwick, Rhode Island. When you walk into the library, you open the door, and standing right there is a shelf covered with those little 4-inch plants, like succulents and cacti, and then painted on it in this little kid writing, take a plant, leaf a plant, right? It's beautiful and heartbreaking, and you love it, and there's no way to not be for it. You want more of it. It's a community collaboration with the Girl Scout troop, bringing kids into the library and bringing climate change, and I think it's part of their climate badge program, right? It's just a wonderful, beautiful moment, and there are 800 of those in the West Warwick, Rhode Island Public Library, and in every library around the country. And so the organized censorship attempts that we're seeing get in the way of that. Lisa Varga, who is the head of the executive director of the Virginia Library Association, has a great, she has a big check that she holds up at legislative sessions saying, this is what it's costing in our very limited resources, right? Or consistently under-resourced public institutions. This is what it is costing us to process the attempts to ban books, which means the attempts to ban the experiences of people in our communities at the library. And for me, it's just a sad and sort of tragic waste. And people are tired. They're very tired. I can feel you on that, Tressie. People are exhausted. And they're exhausted from decades of trying to work in underfunded institutions. I've never been in a library without a bucket under a leak, right? And just we're already dealing with a small number of resources to keep these institutions going. And I think fatigue and fear are two of the biggest things that we're having to fight right now.
Thank you. Lisa, book publishing, what's going on?
It's a very complex and interesting time in book publishing because I think you're dealing with a quiet ban that was going on for decades that's been undone, right? Kind of by the general public, by some of the nonprofit institutions, libraries in the country that have been celebrating and promoting voices of color, queer voices, things we haven't seen before for many years. The last 20 years have been just the kind of changes that have taken place. 10 years really have been extraordinary. The opportunities are endless, but it's made publishing quake, right? It's a rebalancing that has only begun. It is nowhere near mature. I wouldn't say industry-wide, when you look at the critical apparatus, when you look at, all of the different publishing houses, you look at the editorial, sort of workforce, when you look at, the leadership, the leadership demographics, it's not much has really actually changed in publishing, but the veneer has. There have been some strides, but when you look at how big the system is, how many people are employed by it, and how many books we're publishing on any given moment, I think you see a real difference between children's publishing and adult trade publishing, which are in two very siloed, very different areas. And so I can speak from the adult trade publishing side, and I know that a lot of the bans are happening with young people, but that has touched my life as well. So you've got that one thing going on where you're having kind of a real culture war inside of the houses, right? You have an aging and really talented workforce, right? That's been around for a long time and has really overseen this kind of inequitable publishing for a long time. Not everyone, some folks. And then you have sort of a new generation that's really divided, right? Where you have a lot of people who are like, I want to see myself in a book. I want to make this kind of book possible. I'm a new, energetic. I care about reading as a political action, not just as some sort of elite, rigorous activity that makes me feel fancy and good. But then you also have young Americans who just want jobs and like to read, and they grew up reading, Colleen Hoover, in college or whatever they were reading, who really don't want to feel bad. They don't want to feel any worse than those books made them feel, which is the whole point of them. They don't make you feel bad. And so you have, even within the younger generations, which I think people are not acknowledging, the same divergent opinions, around diversity, equity, access, and appropriateness of a sort of literary landscape that actually reflects back the actual American populace. So that, I think, is the sort of larger context in which all of these bans sit. But, but the funny reality about these book bans is every time they ban one of our books, it makes tons of money. So, for me, every time, and I've had two atrocious bans since I've started working in publishing 2.5 years ago. And they were very surprising which books they were, because it's not the ones that I would have picked. But we've had two, sort of crazy bans, and a lot of our books have been banned over the years in and out. So it's nothing new for us. But I think the volume around what happens, these bans back in the day, so Persepolis by Marjane Satrapi, which is about Iran, and it's been banned on and off by 1,000 different people, over the years. And all of them have been very soft sort of censorship, in the sense that somebody just wanted to make a point, and it didn't really go very far, and it didn't have a lot of virality to it. And, not a lot of schools or institutions were impacted, and it didn't hit the news in a way that really energized or got people going. Right. So that's always been happening. And then, January 2022, I'm just minding my own business in my house one day, looking at Twitter, as one does, well, formerly FKA Twitter, and, scrolling, and I see Neil Gaiman on there talking about Art Spiegelman's Mouse has been banned. And it had like 25,000 likes. It was 2 hours old. And I called somebody at work, and I just was like, oh, I think something's going on with Mouse. Should we talk about this? And again, I'm like a baby little publisher. I'm brand new at this time. And, they're like, oh, it happens all the time. And it just got louder and louder. And because it's a new world that we're living in. And I mean, we ended up selling more copies than we could count of Mouse that year. So it's having the Dr. Seuss, when the Seuss estate decided to cancel a few of their own books, right? To say, we don't actually need this to be part of our legacy. Let's just do this. Nobody told them to do it. It was no drama. It was just a sort of considered decision to kind of just like, let's get this done. And the more conservative contingent of the nation got really upset and thought that Dr. Seuss had been canceled and bought all the Dr. Seuss. So it's happening on both sides. You restrict a book because it seems canceled and everybody wants to buy it and it goes on the bestseller list. You ban a book and then the other side buys hundreds of thousands of copies and it goes on the bestseller list. And it's confusing to sort of really think about, it doesn't end up impacting us a ton in terms of what we were thinking curatorially or editorially, because there's not really a downside to the banned books in the same way that there are to the canceled books, right? So you have the whole Jan Wenner thing that happens last week, which is like, that's a kind of thing that would be a big nightmare, right? Where he cell phones in the New York Times and women, 50% of the population are horrified, and it's tough. The Blake Bailey situation was very tough from a publishing perspective, just numerically, not like should be tough, shouldn't be tough, not making any comments of that nature. But on the banning side, you just have these extraordinary sort of everybody now to Tressie's point, where she's just talking about sort of we're all washing data and we're all seeing, but we react so quickly. We see that a book is banned, we click on Amazon. We see that a book is banned, we retweet it. So the speed of this stuff, without even really understanding the larger context of what's happening, just moves so infinitely quickly that it's changed a lot of our work process and flow. But I think the larger issue is about what would happen if we were publishing more of these books to scale, because our workforce had changed. And I think that that's the interesting what if, so much as like what's happening in publishing is like nobody's saying don't buy this book, it'll be banned. I don't know what's happening in children and publishing in the same way, but I published several books. The Diary of Anne Frank, illustrated, is banned right now. I mean, it got a ban 2 days ago, and it's like sold like 5,000 copies like last night, because it was on the news somewhere. It's insane. It's really, 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 it's distracting. Emily made the point of like, this is distracting from the real work. I don't want to be making sure that there's inventory of a book from 15 years ago that kids like, instead of editing a new book or discovering a new voice. And of course you want to earn the money and you want to do good business, but nobody wants to make money because somebody is anti-Semitic.
Right. Yeah.
It's horrible. It's the worst money possible.
And to stay for a minute with publishing and the kind of, follow-on effects of because if we're working with the premise that banning books, since most of the banned books are from the perspective of written by, about people of color, LGBTQ people, vastly, right? Like that's vastly what we're talking about. So understanding that, in commercial publishing, what about getting books green lighted? Or greenlit, because I'm thinking about, you gave a little bit of a brief history of publishing and said that a lot of the decision-making demographics in publishing aren't actually that change. And it would be great if you could just tell us a little bit, because you're unusual in your position.
Sure.
So what about, what gets stories out in the world so that they can even become books in the first place?
I used to be on one about publishing on this front. And I used to be like, well, we're not putting money behind these books and we're not marketing these books and da-da-da-da. And I think that I actually feel like there are issues. There are always going to be issues. And it's not just because I'm inside and I've been like, there's no, Stockholm syndrome happening. It just, it doesn't feel like there's actually, what we're dealing with is an absence of book buyers. Right. I know how many Black Americans there are. And I know that, like I published a book, a beautiful book. And, I know how many buyers there were for that. And it's disproportionate with the audience for that book. Right. Plus all the other people who just might like a story written by a Black woman. That's very good. Right. And, greenlighting it wasn't a problem. Getting people to understand that it was something that we wanted to do in this new context wasn't a problem. Making sure that it had the care and support it needed to be made and to set it up from the sort of imprint side, was there. It's like, I can't really complain about anyone's behavior here, but I don't know if anyone, or if there's ever been any pressure on booksellers to diversify their workforce, on big retail, on critics and book coverage. I don't know that the war has gone there. And so what happens is you've got a sort of updated, professional, an updated scenario inside of publishing where we have more editors of color. We have a couple of publishers of color. We have lots of moving pieces that are going on and improving. We're pushing out a lot of content. We're paying because Publishing Paid Me happened, right? So nobody wants to underpay a writer of color or a marginalized writer in any way. I think people are really scared of getting busted for that sort of thing. So it just doesn't happen. Not that I would naturally do that. I see the books at a larger scale because that's how I view them, right? I believe in the audience. But if you don't change sales and selling, however that looks, whether it's algorithmically at Amazon or whether it's, sort of a human being with their own bias, which we all have, that stayed in a role for 30 or 40 or 50 years, making those same decisions. What's going to change, and how do we, in fact, find those readers? So I do think that there's like a soft, or not even soft, a very large censorship happens all the time. We self-censor by simply not having the people who can widen the audience. For me, I think that it's an interesting timeline to think about what's happening with getting the books done, because they are happening, but they're not selling. You're seeing, even in any mainstream publishing scenario, books are not making it to the bestseller list. You see lots of mysteries, lots of very commercial titles, nowhere near the politics of 2020, where we saw, Jasmine and Ibram and all these people were on the bestseller list, and we were thinking about, all these new topics. It's like, the readership has shrunk back. And we haven't done the work to sort of engage them. So I think that it is really politically, crucially important for those functions that sit around publishing to really try to match the changes that have been made. Of course, we have got to keep changing, and there's lots of changes left to make. But it doesn't matter if I pay somebody $5 million and everyone's really excited. If I go into a meeting with somebody and they're like, my customers aren't going to buy that, my order is no books.
I just want to jump in here. One of the biggest purchasers of books in this country is libraries, right? Like libraries buy a ton of books. And I have to say that question of who is the person connecting you to the book is a live question in our field that we talk a lot about and work on a lot, that you absolutely have to have library staff who reflect the community, because we are the people that connect books to readers, and making sure that everyone in our libraries has, because it's not as if there aren't people of color working in libraries. It's just they are often in staff positions that aren't at the front line connecting a person to a book. And so
it matters to bookstores too.
Said that, Emily, because I was actually thinking about, and I was thinking about this connection too. One of the things that is happening with book bans, I want to just kind of keep making this point. It is not happening in a vacuum. It is part of a political and an economic reclamation. This is just the cultural piece. So like when Lisa's talking about like the audience and like that clawing back of what happened in 2020 and seeing the shrinking of the audience and like people's, fatigue with race books and talking about like, this is part, and like going after libraries is, yes, trying to control like the sort of like cultural discourse and who gets to own what will be the legitimate master narrative. And I use that quite deliberately here of who this country is and who gets to control it. But you also then get to control a really major piece of the economic puzzle of who buys books. Who is the economic actor of who gets books into schools? Another massive customer for books, for curriculum, for textbooks. You talk about, we publish a story every other year that our textbook market is almost completely driven by one state, Texas, because it's big. And that is the reason why they have an outsized influence over the cultural narrative of our story. So there's like the political piece, the cultural and the economic piece, and all of those are working in tandem. And in part, the reactionary response to trying to own book bans, own the cultural piece of the reclamation through book bans, is just trying to keep pace with what's happening politically and economically. It's just doing its part, keeping it going. So while it may seem like a small story, like who would bother with trying to ban 30 books in a small school district, it's just doing its part to be part of this overarching political and economic reclamation that's happening. And that's why it would matter. Libraries buy books, schools set the tone for who will buy the textbooks and who will own the narrative, which then in turn determines who will be the book buyer, which then sets the tone. Well, who will then work in publishing and marketing? Who will then be the critics, who will then in turn determine who will decide that, oh yeah, I don't mind being a teacher. I don't mind working in publishing. All of that, I think, works in tandem. And so really all are having a conversation. And that is why I think we're in this moment.
Absolutely.
Too,
and I'm so glad, Tressie, that you mentioned, go ahead.
The library is a physical place you can go to have your protests, and the book is an object. It's a representation of all these anxieties and these whatever. They're like that. You can exercise real material power in a library, right? Which is why I think we've become a target in that way.
Mm-hmm. And I'm so glad, Tressie, that you mentioned textbooks, which are, I'm sorry, what'd you say, Emily? The last thing you just said?
Nothing, go ahead.
Oh, I wanted to hear it. That you mentioned textbooks, because that's a whole another piece of this. And, Rosa Parks sat down because she was tired. A woman of no particular race at no particular time or place in history. Right.
And
I mean, so it goes.
Just decided to sit down.
Just decided to sit down. Right. Exactly. Before we move to the many, many beautiful questions that are circulating, I'd love just a short anecdote from each of you of who you were as a young reader.
Oh gosh.
Biggest nerd in the world.
Oh my God.
I was the biggest nerd in the world. Were you the biggest nerd in the world, Emily?
Beverly Cleary in order.
Mm-hmm.
Everything. Charles Dickens in order.
Yeah.
Big nerd.
And then once I got through, so if you want, this is I think a perfect snapshot of who I was as a kid. Once I gotten through reading the things in order, Beverly Cleary, huge Beverly Cleary fan, and then Amelia Delia's in order, like by age, I just loved all of the serials. I would come up with my own challenges. My life-defining one was in the fourth grade, I decided to read the biggest book in the library. Sometimes it was I would read a blue book. Sometimes I would read the tallest book. Sometimes I would go in and I would find. And the day I went into the library, school library, Forest Park Elementary School, the biggest book I could find in the library was the autobiography of Malcolm X. And I pulled it off the shelf because it's the biggest book.
Biggest book. What could you do?
That's right. And that was the rule I'd set that day. So there you go. And I was there because I'd get into a little trouble in school, in class, because I was bored. And so the teacher would send me to the library. As one does, it was my safe space, that school library. And I'd get my little hall pass and they just let me ramble about with freedom. And I loved it. I could do whatever I wanted that class period. And the school librarian was my adult friend. And I played my little game I'd set for myself. And I chose that book. And that book changed my life. And that's the kind of reader I was. Again, the biggest nerd in the world.
Yeah. I did not have a story.
Reading. And even a space of reading.
Yep. That's right. Had a space to sit down and read. Unbothered. That's right. They just let you sit there quietly and read.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I recently saw someone who I had in my old childhood neighborhood who I hadn't seen for many, many, many years, and this is the independent bookseller moment, who ran a bookstore in Washington, D.C. called Lamas, a very great and legendary lesbian feminist bookstore where I used to go in high school on Saturday afternoons and did not have to buy a book, would sit for hours and hours. And those beautiful independent bookstores that welcome you, that give you places to sit, that, the cozy old battered chair, and that you can have conversation with these, amazing, in this case, women who were so powerful and had read so much and could direct me to other books. And that was so formative. And a lot of those spaces, there are many amazing independent bookstores, but a lot of those spaces are gone too. But I think that so much learning can take place there when you're welcomed and don't have to have a commercial transaction necessarily.
That's right. That's right.
Any other young reader stories anyone wants to tell?
Your game, Tressie, reminds me of I have a twin sister, and she and I had a challenge. This is a writing challenge. Every paper had to include a lyric hidden from Bruce Springsteen. Just hide the lyric somewhere. The game is resonant, yeah. And also just living at the library. I had lunch in the library every day in high school. I think that's a lot of us, yeah.
We could
I have a great story from my childhood.
You were cool,
not childhood. Take it forward.
I was extreme. I was a flag twirler with a tall flag. I was absolutely not cool at all. But, I wasn't a very interesting reader. I mean, I gave Bunnicula a standing ovation, which my parents thought was quite hilarious when I was little. I read tons and tons. I was always a huge, sort of serial reader. I was, kind of an only child until I was 13, had a lot of energy, and those books were my friends. But I really feel like when I graduated college and I lived in Chicago and I moved up to the north side, I went to school in Hyde Park. And I finally got out of the collegiate academic, everybody assigning me things year after year after year, which I loved. But I went into a bookstore and they handed me White Teeth. It was a bookstore on the north side, sort of. They handed me Zadie Smith's White Teeth. And I'm not British. I'm not biracial. I'm not, from, I don't have anything really to do with Zadie, right? But somehow her intellectualism and her sharp and snarky and funny way to move the world, and I just finally found something that looked like me, my world, my multicultural sort of, smart ass world. And there's lots of books and experiences that speak to my soul that aren't that kind of book, but I had just never read anything like it. I had never seen myself. And because there was a, shelf talker and some guy had written it and he was like, oh, that's my favorite book. You should totally read it. And I took my dollars from my little job and I bought it with my money and nobody told me to read it. And I was graduated from college. So I had time to read and space to do it. And it just felt like that one purchase, that one transaction was truly the day I became a real reader, the kind of reader that I am today. And yeah, and it was across nations, across all sorts of things, but it just was it's remained such an important book for me. I have a hard time rereading it because I just don't want to mess with the magic. I know you're supposed to reread Nabokov Sad too, but I just, I don't want to mess with the magic.
You don't have to
Life
always
is
reread.
short. No, it's too short. I got too much to do. I don't reread.
I rarely
so
reread.
here we got a lot of questions, and I'll start with one that a lot of people are asking, but here I'm reading the version that comes from Susan Broden. How can concerned citizens protect our local libraries from these attacks by groups who want to control what goes on the shelves based on their narrow beliefs? Our county is going through this now in Front Royal, Virginia. So Emily, maybe you could start by taking that one.
Front Royal and what's happening there, and solidarity to all of you fighting for the right to read in Front Royal. I think the first thing I would say, we got to use our public libraries. If you don't have a library card, go get one. If you have a friend who doesn't have a library card, bring them with you. We have to use our public institutions. This is a use it or lose it moment. So that's the first thing I would say. The second thing, everybody can do something. I think a lot of us sort of sit and wait for like the answer to come and like to get the plan all worked out and the strategy. But the truth is, in a fight like this one, we don't know what's going to be the thing that gets the win. So we need everybody doing a little bit of something. I strongly urge everyone to sign up for the American Library Association's Unite Against Book Bans campaign, uniteagainstbookbans.org. You can sign up, and that's a way to stay connected to actions that are happening across the country. We're able to mobilize advocates on a moment's notice to take action in their local communities, and that you'll find lots of ideas and options and ways of thinking about what we can do on that website. Everything from how to talk to the media, talking points for talking about book bans, how to write a letter to the editor, how to show up at your school board meeting, how to show up at your library board meeting. And I think the most important thing that we can do is we need people who care about libraries and who love libraries to be in charge of libraries. So if you can look at your public libraries, see how that library board is composed, is it elected, is it appointed? And if you care about libraries and you care about the right to read for everybody, try to figure out a way to get yourself on that board. We need all hands on deck in this moment. That's what the people who want to shut down our libraries are doing. So we gotta fight back in those kinds of ways. uniteagainstbookbans.org.
Thank you. Thank you. Here is a question from Pamela Scully. I would love to hear from the panel what they think university leaders should be doing and what coalitions need to be built.
Hey, Pamela. Listen, it is not available to everyone everywhere, but if it is, join, support your union. For those of you who do not know, we are in a historic union moment in this country. And here's what we know from social movement research. We do not know why these moments happen. We do know that when they happen, you have to avail yourself of them. Truly, we don't know. They try to measure these things. What we know is I happen to think that there's just this sort of like energy, and we are in an energy moment. I mean, there's some like political conditions can happen, and there's some economic seeding type thing happens. We're in such a moment. If you are in a place where you can support a union, join your union. If you are in a state where you cannot fully unionize, I happen to know, for example, Georgia, you may not be able, certain places throughout the South, for example, but that does not mean that you do not have a collective organization as such. So something like the ACLU, this is just a moment to join. This is one of the greatest things I have learned from people who are like lifers, right? People who have just been doing the work of building collective action over the long haul. Join something. And I want to be transparent here. I find joining hard, difficult. I'm not a joiner at all. I'm a bit of a loner. I was an only child. I'm a loner. I do a lot of solitary work, and I'm intrinsically motivated. But as a political act, joining almost anything at this point is singularly one of the most important things that you can do. I think particularly in this work as leaders, we can sometimes see it as an abdication of the distance we need to take, so that we can remain sort of politically neutral for the people that we lead or supervise, and we need to sort of model distance, and we see that as a sign of professionalism. I actually think in this moment that modeling how to be a good joiner and member of a collective action and team is one of the best things that higher education leaders can do, whether that is your ACLU, whether that is a community leadership organization that welcomes people across different points in their career development. Join, show people how to join, show people how to have a good, deliberative, actionable meeting and action. Join, and get involved. Hold public to the extent that you can safely, because not every community and every conversation is safe to have. And I want to acknowledge that. But one of the things that we know how to do is we know how to teach and learn. We know how to teach and learn. You don't need to do that in a classroom. This is the time for freedom learning, honey. Freedom schools. Here is the moment for that. Teach people how to understand university budgets. Teach people where the money comes from and where it goes. Teach people how our work happens. The disconnect that people have from their universities and why they find it so easy for them to be devalued and gutted is because they don't know how we work. Right? So demystifying the way that we work and understand that we are caring not just for their young people, but for the public good on their behalf is some of the most important work that we can do. And I say that with an understanding that we are all already doing so very much. And while we are out there trying to collectively organize and teach and organize on our own behalf, let us also remember that a lot of people have been doing this with a whole lot less security and power than we have for a very long time. So let's try to remember to support those who have been unionizing and organizing and agitating all up and down staff positions, your housekeepers, your groundskeepers at the universities, and to do so from a place of humility to support them in their organizing efforts, because they've probably been doing it a while and could learn a whole lot from their successes and progress that they've done over the years.
Thank you. This question is from Marilyn Smith. Can we put ourselves inside the minds of people who want to ban books and figure from that perspective how best to retain access and transparency? Arguing from the perspective of someone who believes in open information and sharing and facts will not work with people who are closed, and there is too much information and too many opportunities to share. So I think to connect that to a few other questions, can we put ourselves inside the minds of people who want to ban books? What do we think it's useful to think of some of the motivations, and how might we address those? How might we talk to someone who wants to ban books that we don't think should be banned, or that we don't think books should be banned at all?
Well, Emily mentioned this at the top of our conversation. We recently talked for a podcast, and I think Emily did a great job here of talking about the best good faith, I think, position on this is that there is a lot of fear during times of great instability, and we are living in such a time. Economic inequality, social change, and if your psychological or emotional disposition during such times is withdrawal and fear, you're very afraid right now. And it's easy for that to be exploited and manipulated. And there are a lot of economic and political incentives for very powerful actors to do exactly that. And I think that's what we are seeing. And that's the best good faith interpretation I have, right? And so I think especially if you are a parent and disproportionately the job for doing that kind of managing fear falls on women, I think there's a reason why so much of this is being led by mothers. And so I asked Emily, listen, you can sympathize with a mother who is afraid that her kid really is going to be what? Human trafficked at the public library, right? If they get the wrong book. And if they, get a book that exposes them to something that's going to make them hate you, right? And hate the thing that you are afraid that you're losing, your faith, your family's traditions, right, et cetera. And so I think it's the best, good faith interpretation I've got of trying to empathize. And arguing from that perspective. I mean, but
The
yeah.
only thing I'd add to that, because I think that's right. Like, people are very afraid, and I know when I'm afraid, I try to control things. I've been through a lot of therapy about that. Totally understand the impulse, completely familiar to me.
Yeah.
But I think, the focus needs to be on what connects us, And so people who want to ban a book and are going to build their lives around trying to produce an exclusion there are very few people like that, right? Like, I think there was an article in the Washington Post that traced like thousands of censorship attempts to like 2 people.
Exactly.
So, there's a lot of light around those people, but I have to believe those numbers are small. We see again and again when this sort of fight arrives in a community, that the community shows up in huge numbers to push back. So, putting yourself in the minds of people who maybe don't see the urgency and aren't clear on how to get mobilized and connected to other people and trying to figure out a way to solve those problems for them seems like a better use of that brain space, I think. Bringing people out and bringing them together when we have to take sort of a collective stand on behalf of libraries.
I think the thing is, you can't change every heart and mind. You just can't, but what you can do is get involved in local politics. You can get involved in your community board. You can, donate and support. You can join, as Tressie said, you know what I mean? I think that you take their anger and use it as fuel to activate towards good. Because it's hard, sometimes it's just a fight, and that's where you are, and that's where someone else is. And, how do you actually say, okay, fine, you can do what you need to do, but I'm here to sort of provide alternative options and to create the same kind of noise on the other side of what you're saying, and to render myself human always, and to treat people like humans always, and to say, I don't dislike you, I just disagree. And I think, it's like, just do your work in peace. I think that we don't want to match ugly with ugly ever, right? Because that's not what books are. That's not what reading is. That's not what this fight is about. And I know that's really basic, but it's like, I think it's really easy to be like, how do I talk to my, family members that are conservatives, which I have. And, at a certain point I can't, but I can live my life out loud. I can practice and perform me. And as readers, we can talk about books. We can encourage people to, every time somebody says, I want to ban a book, find 3 people to buy a book. Give 3 books to young children that in your community, in your life, in your family. Do something loving and productive every time you can't change a mind. And I think that's a good personal practice. And I think that also local and state politics are everything right now. And so a lot of that energy that we want to use on working our neighbor because they get on our nerves because we just can't understand how they could believe this should be spent voting in these very, very small elections that mean everything for how we empower people, where you have 500 and 600 people voting. Show up. It matters. The most of almost anything you can do is getting involved in the local government election, because this stuff is not happening through the federal government. This is happening on local and state levels. And so, again, that's not really a direct answer to how do you change a heart and mind of somebody who's decided that they want to be a book banner or they're supportive of it. It's like, and I hope you can have that conversation. I do. And I hope I can have that conversation. And when I do manage to, I'm so pleased. But 9 times out of 10, you cannot. And so I think you just have to sort of say, I'm going to channel this energy and I'm going to be an agent of change in my own small sphere. And these are the ways that I can actually make an impact.
I think that's perfect.
I think that's perfect too. And that is where we shall conclude. Thank you all so much. There was enough time and not enough time. We could have gone on and on with so many of the rich and amazing observations that you made. And I really want to acknowledge all of the conversation that's happening in the chat, all of the connections that people are making, all of the information that's being shared, all of the citations. You all should know that the things that you said are being cited and websites are being put in the chat. So thank you to everyone watching for being such an avid part of this and for being so engaged. This was wonderful. I'm filled with gratitude, and I would like to invite everybody here to come back to your screens in 2 weeks at our next virtual Mellon event, which is called The Determined Hope of the Humanities. Yes, we believe. So I hope to see you on October the 10th. And meanwhile, to our luminous guests, thank you so much, and good evening to everybody.